let me kind of talk about this talk right here. So this is something that I wanted 4 years ago when I was starting at Lullabot. And I got put on a project, and this project was very ambitious. It was a lot of animations for the Sci-Fi Network. And I had to learn a lot of this stuff. And I remember looking through all the documentation and trying to find everything all in one place, and I didn't. So long story short, this is kind of the result for that. So like Utrecht is pretty awesome. I took these pictures earlier. As you can see, there's like buildings and canals and dom towers and boats, and like, so thank you to all the organizers. Tonight, while we all go out for dinner, the organizers should not have to buy beer. Everything should be bought for them. This is me and my daughter and my old dog. I am a senior front-end developer at Lullabot. If you're not familiar with Lullabot, we are a content strategy / design / development company. We work with a lot of Drupal, but we do a lot of other stuff. So does everybody remember Firebug? Know what that is? Right? So even before that, who here is front-end developers? Cool. Who here is like a back-end developer? Who here is just hanging out? All right. For the people at the other places, most people are just hanging out. So Firebug was kind of like the original developer tools. You would have to install it separately through Firefox, and it was so cool because you could select your element and it would show you what CSS properties you had in there, and it was so neat. Prior to that, we had to like use like outline border red and stuff like that, and it was horrible. And so those are my slides right here. So this is all live demo, and I have this awesome GIF up here. This guy is awesome. So I put this GIF up here because this is how my demo typically goes. So we'll watch this just one more time. There he goes. All right. So what we're going to do is we're just going to work through a little bit of Chrome, and we're going to start on, we are going to start in Chrome Canary. So who here is familiar with what Chrome Canary is? It's basically like Chrome of the future, right? With like a little bit buggier, and it has a yellow icon. If you're using Chrome, if you're using developer tools, use Canary developer tools, because if you find a bug, you can typically get it fixed, and it's there's some new neat stuff in there, so we're using that. You can just Google Chrome Canary download, and it'll take you right there. So if you're opening up developer tools, like the first thing we're going to talk is with a couple shortcuts. So I like Command-Option-C because it takes you right into inspecting stuff. So like a lot of times, you know, you right click, you can go to inspect, and then you have to hit this button right here, and then you inspect stuff. So Command-Option-C takes you right there, and you can do that. So all right, so we're there. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through basically all these tabs. Now I have probably a good like 2 hours worth of content, so we're just going to blow through this like super fast. And if you have questions, you can just, and I'm not looking up or whatever, you can throw something at me, or you can just yell, and that's completely cool. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Elements tab right here. So the Elements tab, of course, is where well, the Elements tab for me is where I do the majority of my work. The normal stuff that you see here, let's go to, I don't know, Front-End United's website. And you can see. And the normal things you see here, of course, is you see a lot of CSS properties. If I can select an element that has some CSS properties. And you know, you can get in here and you can start modifying stuff by hitting up and down. If you hit the Alt button, you can do tenths. And if you hold the Shift button, oops, that's not what I want. You hold the Shift button, you can do 20s. So that's kind of a little tip right here. Another thing that you can do is you can copy and paste your elements in here. So this is very useful if you're working with a content management system like Drupal or WordPress, and you want to see how is this going to work if my content editors throw in like a really, really long ass title. You can just go ahead and copy, and you can paste, and paste again. And if you look here, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. And so that's pretty cool. You can also edit this text directly. You can say like Sally Young. You know, you can say stuff like that. You can also, if you go into the console, you can do something like you can do content editable, which is pretty cool. And then you can get in here and you can start editing stuff directly, which is pretty neat. Especially, I've seen a lot of designers get in here and start doing cool stuff like that. Let's see. Another thing that a lot of times I do is, like, if you're trying to figure out where, say, a background image is coming from, you can select an element and you hit the H button. And the H button basically toggles visibility hidden. So what visibility hidden does is it hides it visibly, but it doesn't remove it from the DOM. It still has like the layout around it. It just removes the painting from it. So you can do that, and you can kind of work your way up and down the DOM tree right here to see if the element that you're looking for disappears when you're toggling that. That's something that's pretty useful. You can also drag stuff around, so you can, you know, I don't know, drag the sponsors up here, and you can kind of see how stuff might look, and, you know, drag stuff around. And that's, once again, when you're working with a content management system, that's kind of useful for, as a front-end developer, for seeing how your CSS and how your styles are going to react to weird-ass content that's put in. So looking over here, there's a couple cool things that are relatively new. So let's get into, let me select some text right here. So I can see that, you know, I have these styles down here under the styles pane, and you can select this right here, and I can go ahead and go into contrast ratio. And this is pretty cool from an accessibility standpoint, because, you know, certain people need a certain level of contrast in order to, you know, be able to read the text. So at this point, I'm going to select my background color, and like this, and I can see like white on white looks like it doesn't have obviously a very good contrast ratio. So that's something that you can do. You can select colors right here in this little swatch, which is pretty neat, or obviously up here. Something else that's relatively new is if you're looking at an element right here, a lot of times when I'm doing a little bit of debugging, I'm trying to figure out what element's what, I type in background red. So you can do stuff like that right here. And I can go into, say, I don't know, this right here, and you have these three little dots, and if you go over here, you can say add background color. And it's just like a little, I don't know, whatever you call it, like, it's a little shortcut to make things a little bit quicker. You can do the same thing in many different ways, but that's just something that's pretty cool. A couple of other things that are really, really useful to know is that a lot of times you're trying to track down maybe how an element is positioned. And so you go to the computed tab over here. And so you maybe type in position. And you can hit show all, and it'll show the positioning right here. So right now my position is default, which is static, which is pretty cool. So a couple things that's like really useful is you have this filter where you can do that. You have this show all button. And of course, above this, it'll show your padding, your margins, which you can double click and edit yourself too. So I can click in here and, like, you know, type in 20, and it'll add a margin. So that's pretty cool. So event listeners, right? So these are JavaScript event listeners. They listen for things like scroll, listen for things like clicks and stuff like that. You can select an element, and you can see what event listeners are attached to this element. So we can look at this, and there's certain cases where you're trying to figure out what the hell is causing this event to happen, what's happening here, and you can hit this remove button right here and see if it still happens. So you can remove event listeners that way, which is a pretty neat way to do it. I'm going to go to a website that I have this website I made with my daughter right here, and it's one of my favorite websites. And let me turn on my audio here. And it does cool things like, is my audio turned up? It says I don't have audio. I'm not quite sure why. Let's see what happens. All right. Well, it makes sounds, and so as you hit the button and or click the. All right. You want to try?
Daddy.
There we go.
Daddy is a stinky butt.
That's our favorite one right there. So you can let it go now. That's the magic of it. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to try to figure out, we're going to take a look at the JavaScript, and we're going to try to figure out where these interactions are coming from. And this is something like Lullabot, we frequently get pulled into other projects to rescue them or somehow get into them, and we have to figure out what the heck's going on. And a lot of times what's going on isn't quite what you think it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to select an element right here, and we're going to hit this button here. Let me mute it so I don't distract myself. And I can see, like in purple right here, that this thing is moving, you know? All right, there you go. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a Dom breakpoint on this. So this is not like a CSS breakpoint. This is a breakpoint, it's a JavaScript breakpoint. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to break on, and in this situation we're going to select attribute modifications. And what that's going to do is when the attribute of that element is modified, it's going to show us the JavaScript where that changes. So let's go ahead and do that. So in addition to that, you can break on when the element gets removed or when the subtree gets modified. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to hit the D button. And at this point, you can see right here, it takes me directly to my JavaScript file where I'm adding that CSS class that says JS Active. So that's like pretty cool. I can start stepping through here, and I can kind of see what things are happening. That's honestly like kind of neat, right? Let's kind of look a little bit more. You can do searches right here. So I can do a search for. I can just hit Command F and do a search for whatever. I can. Let me hit the play button so I'm not paused. You can search for selectors here too. So I can type in key, and it'll find like anything that has the key class in it. With you can see I put a little dot down there. That's pretty useful. And what else do I have here? Something else that I find is pretty useful when you're trying to look for what elements are getting modified, and you're trying to look for that purple in there. So what you can do is you can, like, say, collapse the element, and you hold down the Alt button. And when you hold the Alt button and expand it, it expands all the child elements under there. And at that point, you can start messing around, and you can kind of look at the DOM tree, and you can see what's changing, what's looking, and it'll give you a pretty good idea. So that's something that is pretty neat for me. Something else that's relatively new over here is the accessibility tree. This accessibility tab over here is pretty new, and it gives you a lot of interesting information, including like your different what do you call them, accessibility roles and areas here. Let's kind of move around a little bit here. Let's go over to sources. So sources is something where you typically do a lot of your JavaScript debugging. Who here primarily does like console logs and stuff like that when debugging JavaScript? And, all right, so that's probably a good half of the people. Who here actually like uses a debugger, whether it's Chrome or something else? So that's maybe like, I don't know, maybe a little less than half. So let's go ahead and, I'm going to give you maybe a 2-minute overview of debugging JavaScript for those who are not familiar with it, because it's like pretty awesome. So let's go back to this right here, because this is some JavaScript that I wrote, so it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go to sources right here, and I'm going to close out. You know, am I in Chrome? or yeah, I'm in Canary right there. So I'm going to hit Command P, not Command P. I'm not going to print it. No, it is Command P right there. But you have to have your focus in the Dev Tools. So if you're familiar with Sublime, there's like a couple keyboard shortcuts like Shift Command P, and multiple cursors. What's really cool about Chrome Developer Tools is it does a lot of the same things. And I think those keyboard shortcuts I just rattled off are a little bit different for Windows and or Linux, but you get the idea of it. So I'm going to hit Command P to switch files, and I'm just going to type in something like app.js right here. So at this point, I can see my JavaScript right here, and I can set a breakpoint. And when you set your breakpoint, you can see over here that, I clicked on line 30, but it put it on 31 because that's where the breakpoint will actually break. And we can kind of see what happens. So right now it looks like I have this in a play sound play sound thing. So you can kind of see I triggered that event listener right there, which runs that function, and it stops right there. So at this point I'm stopped, and what's really powerful at this is I can start looking around. I can see that I can see what variables I have right here. So I can see that I have a drum element. I can see I have a drum sound. I can see this. I can see sound right here. And what's kind of cool is you can start expanding this and going down that object, because in JavaScript everything is an object, and you can start to see what methods are available on that. I'm going to remove this breakpoint at some point here. Because I typed this D in here, it's all messed up. Let me just reload. So I have my breakpoint unchecked. I can remove this right here. And let's kind of look at the click event right here. So I'm going to click right here. And when I click, it's going to break. And at that point, I can take a look at my event object, which is pretty neat. So I can see everything that's currently exposed that I can pull in. I can see where the mouse is when I clicked it. And all this is part of that event API. But you can get in here and kind of explore stuff, which makes things pretty cool. So when you're in here, of course, as I said before, you can use multiple cursors. So I can hold down the Command key and I can do things like this, and I don't know. You kind of make changes en masse like that, which is pretty neat. You can set a watch expression up here, so I can go ahead and type in, as I'm stepping through, I can take a look at E or something like that, and I can see when it's available, when it's not available, which is pretty neat. You can also, if you have a breakpoint here, let me refresh this one more time. If I have a breakpoint and so I can see E is my keyboard event right here. You can set this to be a global variable right there, so you might have easier access to it within your JavaScript console, which is pretty neat. Oh yeah, another thing that you can do, which is pretty cool, is if you're in a loop, you can actually, and you want to just, of course, look directly at one condition within the loop, you can edit your breakpoint. So you can say so it'll only break if I is equal to whatever value you want that to be equal to. So that's pretty cool, So yeah. So who here, and it's all right if nobody, but who here has learned something? All right. So for the record, no one's raising their hand. So yeah. So this is pretty cool stuff, right? So for me, when I'm learning JavaScript, and I consider myself still to be fairly newbie-ish at it, going through breakpoints and setting a debugger, using a debugger properly is just kind of rapidly increased my learning of this. So that's pretty cool. So let's go to the network tab. What time do I end here? Does anybody know? Yeah, whatever. 25 minutes. All right, so we're going to do network tab, and then my favorite tab is the performance tab, so we're going to do that. So the network tab is just like everything that's, of course, that's coming down the network. So let's kind of look. Recently, I worked on a Drupal 7 site called Pantheon, which is a hosting company. And we redid the front page, and we redid several landing pages. And we also made a bunch of performance improvements here. So I'm going to take a look at the network tab, and we are going to kind of start looking around, right? So I'm hitting Command-R. It's going to pull everything down, and we're just going to take a quick look at it. So you can see at the top up here, I have kind of like the little waterfall, and you can see stuff, but I'm not really interested in that right now. You can also filter your to look at the network requests based on like all your XHRs, which is like all your like XML HTTP requests, but it also includes like JSON and stuff like that, JavaScripts and stuff like that too. So I'm going to do this one more time here. I'm going to get rid of that. So there's a couple things that you can see that are coming in right here. So and some of this is kind of really interesting too. So you can see like the protocol right there is HTTP 1.1, which is kind of interesting. They're on a CDN, and in the US we're getting HTTP 2. So you can start troubleshooting things like this. The next thing that's coming in is fonts, and I can talk about a little bit about that. We're using resource hints in the head of the HTML that basically pull into font. And at that point, it'll load up a little bit quicker. So there's a couple things that we can look at right here. Like number one, you're seeing two values right here. You're seeing this 18 kilobytes, and you're seeing 72 kilobytes. So the 18 is obviously the gzipped value, and the 72 is the real amount that it actually has to parse. You can look at the HTTP headers in here, which is kind of neat, and you can actually see like a lot of different like headers from their CDN, from the server that it comes from. You can probably see Dries' birthday somewhere in here, right here. That if you're familiar with Drupal, the expires header is set to Dries' birthday, which is kind of like a little thing. And yeah, so it's just like kind of a little bit neat stuff to see in here. You can also see cookies, and I think at some point it shows the total size of the cookies and timings and stuff like that. In the network tab, we also have a Filmstrip View. So if you hit this, you can see where my mouse is right here. You can hit reload, and it'll actually show you what it looks like as it's loading up right here. You can also sort by size. I always do the size sort. Like the most common thing I typically see with that is like people uploading PNGs instead of JPEGs. PNGs have a lot more data in them to download with a larger file size. So you want to use JPEGs, when you can, obviously, when you don't need that alpha transparency. Let's see what else we can do. We can emulate offline mode. Does this website work offline? No. You can disable the cache. You can preserve log. Preserve log is like really useful for when you have like a number of redirects. So like by default, you get a 301 or 302 redirect. It will clear the request that it shows you, but you might want that. So you hit the preserve log button, and it'll show that to you. Oh yeah, so showing third-party badges, which is pretty neat. So I'm going to hit Command-Shift-P, type in badges, show third-party badges, and a lot of times what you'll see in here is you'll see these little things right there. You can see where my mouse is, and it'll help you to identify third-party scripts and where they're coming from. And that's something that's relatively new too. Let's look at the Performance tab. The Performance tab is one of my favorite tabs because it does a lot. It's pretty awesome. So let's go ahead and make this big. And I'm going to hit the profile and reload page button, which is at the top left. And we're going to let this profile, and hopefully it'll load up. I've noticed sometimes it'll kind of lock up because we're in Canary, but we'll see what happens. So we have a lot of information here, which is pretty cool, right? So you have the networks, you have like a little flame chart going down here, and we can start to maybe get an idea of what's happening. So let's take a look in here. So the first thing you can do is you can actually select stuff in here, right? So you can select what's happening, and all these like little up and downs right here, if there's different frames, sometimes you'll see like iframes for ads, like that's what this is right here, or in this case it's Marketo, which like manages the forms. So we're going to look at this, and you can select stuff and you can see exactly what's happening. We're evaluating a script right here. The purple is going to be layout. So when your browser downloads the web page, it has to, of course, get your HTML. It downloads all those critical files that Harry talked about earlier, including like the CSS, JavaScripts that are blocking the initial rendering. And so it downloads everything, and then it has to parse the CSS, has to parse the render blocking JavaScript. It creates a document object model. It creates the CSS object model. It makes a render tree. And at that point, it does layout. And the layout that we can see right here is in purple. So you can see that we're doing some layout, and this layout right here is caused by this right here. So there's probably some earlier layout somewhere in here too, or maybe not. And so typically you don't want to do layout too much because layout's an expensive operation. After you do layout, it does the painting operation, which is where it actually like colors stuff in, and then if you have multiple layers, it'll put them all together. So we can take a look at where some of this is coming from by hovering over this flame chart. Now, when you're looking at a flame chart, the longer it is, the worse it is, because that means it's taken up a long time. When your browser is evaluating JavaScript, it uses a single thread, and it's called the main thread. So it basically uses one CPU core in your computer. It doesn't spread those across multiple cores, although it will put like different tabs on different cores. But it will put all those on one core, and if that's blocked, if that's busy, then your website will like lock up. Who here has like gone to like a website on their phone, and it loads up, and then you hit the button, and then nothing happens? Like, isn't that like annoying? Like that happens a lot. And what that is that's the main thread blocking interactions right here. So like typically, there's a couple metrics that we use to measure that. Some of the metrics are, so the metric for that particular one is time to interactive, the time when your website first becomes interactive. And we can kind of look at this right here. In this case right here, I would say time to interactive is probably right around 4 seconds right here. So there's other metrics, including time to first paint. When the website actually starts painting, there's time to like last hero paint. There's kind of a metric for whatever you need. So we can take a look at that. Now, something that's really useful is identifying third-party scripts. I can tell you for certain that like Pantheon, as with most websites that try to sell you something, it will have third-party scripts in there that might do like A/B testing. They'll have scripts in there that like capture some type of user data so they can put ads, like while I was doing development for this, I would go on Facebook and see like all types of Pantheon ads till I had to block them because it became annoying. And so we can start identifying some of those by going to the bottom-up view right here. And so with the bottom-up view, it shows you like what's taking up most time. And what's really cool about this is you can actually group by domain right here. So we can see on this bottom right here that Optimizely, which is doing some type of A/B testing, is using up 200. It's using up about a third of a second. We have Olark, which is like the little chat clients, using up stuff to write that too. And we can move around and kind of see what's going on, and you can see where those are coming, and you can see these values are kind of changing in real time, which is super, super cool. And you can start exploring a little bit. If you go in here, I'm going to hit the escape button, and it's going to bring up this little drawer, which I could also activate by, where is it? Open console drawer. It's the same thing right there. I'm going to hit this little menu right here, and I'm going to go down to request blocking. So request blocking, you can block certain domains. And you can see I've been in here messing with this before. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to block all the third-party domains right here. And I'm going to hit reload one more time. And at that point, what we can do is we can see how it compares. So you can see right here, we're doing a lot less. And if you hit this drop down, it'll actually show you, this will save up to 5 performance profiles. And so this is like really useful. Like as a front-end developer, I hate third-party scripts because I do not have control over them, and they always slow down my websites. I have worked on like many websites where you'll have a script in there that will like be like doing recalculations and stuff like that on every type of interaction, and it's just like really annoying. One of the ways that you can maybe get around this, depending on your team, is by profiling this, showing the graph to the marketing team, and at that point saying, hey, listen, you know, this is slowing down our website. Here's a graph that proves it. And at that point, you know, we're probably losing, you know, optimization. We're probably losing conversions here. And that's something that, you know, I think most people can understand. So that's pretty cool. Let's take a look at some other stuff that we can see here. Let's take a look at the console in here. So the console is pretty cool. Let me go back to sources and maybe, so everybody knows about, like, of course, console.log, and you can type in test or whatever, and it'll do that. So something that's pretty new in Canary is that I like is called eager evaluation. And what it does is it kind of auto-completes stuff for you in a cool way. So you can check the box right here by like hitting this little cog, hitting eager evaluation. You can hit Shift Command P and type in eagerly evaluate console. Like they're like, I really want to evaluate your console prompt text, you know? So document.query selector all, let's do div. And you can see before I even like hit enter, it's going to tell me, it's going to show, hey, I'm getting a node list, and I can do this. So at that point, you can do things like, I don't know, filter. If this is not an array, but if it was, you could maybe filter it. You could do things like that. And it allows you to maybe do your JavaScript a little bit faster because you're getting live results. Now, what it won't do is it won't, like if you're making changes, it won't eagerly evaluate and parse those changes and push those changes to your website, because obviously that would really, really stink. But that's something that's pretty cool. Let's see what else we can do. You can do things like, let's see if this works right here. Let me enter. You do console.memory. You can take a look at your memory. You can console tables stuff too. So like console.table, I don't even know what's in here. And so if you have like a large array of stuff, you can actually like output that into a table. It might make it a little bit easier to digest. If you're in your code, you could do things like console.time, what is it, timeline? Or is it, I think it's just time. And you just put in a string in here. And this end. And it'll tell, so you throw that into your code, and it tells you exactly how long your code took to evaluate. So that's something that you can do to profile your code and maybe run like some tests against it. A couple of other cool things here. So mobile evaluation is pretty neat, right? So if you have a website and you want to know how it's going to look like on a mobile device, you can hit this little button up here, toggle device, mobile device toolbar. It allows you to change devices right here, but something that's important to know is that it changes it'll emulate, you know, the pixel density, it'll emulate the screen size, but it does not emulate the rendering because it's just one browser. So for example, if you're trying to emulate like, I don't know, a iOS Safari bug, of which there are way too many, in Chrome, you're probably going to have a bad time because you're not going to get those same exact results. So that's something to be aware of while you're in here. You can also, there's a way in here to adjust your throttling. So we don't want to do performance monitor. So you can throttle your network, but there's also a way to throttle your CPU, and I'm trying to figure out where it is. Stuff like this moves around like fairly often, it seems to me. Either that or my memory gets bad, but there's a way in here to like throttle your CPU. If you go to your audits tab across the top, your audit's pretty neat. It can do like PWA audits. It can do network audits and accessibility audits, but this will actually slow down your CPU too, because when you're getting your Lighthouse score, that's assuming that you're on a mobile device with a slower CPU, which is pretty neat to know. Something else that's fairly important that's useful when you're doing animations is rendering, right? So let me go to the Sci-Fi website, and hopefully it'll let me in with like all the GPDR stuff. And we're going to go to watch sci-fi shows. And there's these animations that come up, and the animations are tied to the scroll events. So we're going to let this come up right here. So is everybody familiar, number one, with The Expanse? It's like freaking awesome. It's like the best sci-fi that's on TV, and like the Sci-Fi actually canceled it, but then Amazon picked it up, and anyway. So as I scroll down, you're going to see like stuff is starting to move around right here, right? And it's kind of doing like a little bit of scroll jacking. It's binding to the scroll event, and at that point it starts translating. And we could see that if we inspect it, but we're not going to quite do that right now. What we're going to do is we're going to go into rendering, and we're going to check the box for paint flashing. So what paint flashing will do is when you start moving stuff around, it will show you when the web page is repainting. And this is pretty useful because painting is a very expensive operation. There's ways to mitigate it, but the most important thing that you need to do is be able to identify it. If you can identify the problem, then you can Google it, right? So if we scroll down, we're probably not going to see any painting, and that's because it's kind of mitigated right here. But let's see if we can maybe force it right here. I'm going to do asterisk. I'm going to do backface visibility, visible, important. And now we should be getting a lot more paintings, hopefully. Yeah, you can kind of see as it's happening. Chrome does a good amount of, each new version of Chrome will try to identify and remove those paintings. But you can kind of see it's doing that. Have you ever gone to a kind of like one of those parallax websites and you start scrolling and it's going like and it's all like kind of crazy and stuff like that? That's your computer trying to do paints on every like little scroll, and that's super annoying. So a way to fix that is by using. There's a couple of different ways to do that. You can use will change, which is a newer property. It's not supported by everything yet. What I've used when I came into this project, this was about 4 years ago, and it's since changed a bunch since then. We use backface visibility, and backface visibility, what that is like if you're doing 3D transforms on your element, if you flip it around, can you see the backside? And so that doesn't like quite have like, you're probably thinking to yourself, what does that have to do with this right here? But what it does is it promotes it, by using that property on this, it promotes it up into its own layer, which isn't the same as like z-index or anything else, but it's more of like a render layer, which can then be composited onto your screen later, which is a cheaper operation. So to do that, you would do backface visibility hidden. And you do that on everything that's moving around, and it just makes everything like a little bit smoother. Something else to note there is like when you're animating stuff around, you want to use Css Transforms and or opacity because if you're using like top left and other values such as that, like those aren't optimized for moving around, and so it'll be kind of slow and a bad experience. You can actually view those layers that I talked about, the layer borders, by checking this right here. I haven't ever like really found like a really cool use case for this, except for the fact that you can do it. The FPS meter is frames per second. This maxes out at 60. So if you're doing like, and it only actually moves when you're actually doing stuff. So you can see it'll go up right here. But if you're going below 30 frames per second, it starts to get a little jittery. And if you're going below like 15 frames per second, you can definitely notice. But yeah, 60 is kind of where you want to end up. And you also want to keep in mind that when you're testing this out on your computer, you're probably using like a modern computer. And you might be, a lot of your end users might be using a cheaper computer and might not have as nice of a CPU. Scrolling performance issues has never really been very useful for me. So yeah, what else do we have in here? The application tag, so let's make this big a bit again right here. All right, so we have 5 minutes left right here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the application tab, and then I'll take some questions. So the application tab is basically, we saw a little bit of this in an earlier talk, but you can, of course, you have access to your local storage. You can get in here and you can start editing stuff. You have access to your service workers, which we saw earlier on the PWA talk. And you have access to your cookies. So you can delete cookies in here. You can just hit the delete button and kind of just go through and start removing stuff. And this is useful for obviously when you're doing development and trying to figure stuff out. And you can kind of clear everything right here, just clear site data, and it'll get everything out of there. There are times, like if you're working with service workers, that the service worker cache will persist through like hard refreshes and stuff like that. You have to go in and you have to hit that button. So that's just something to keep in mind. One other cool thing is local overrides, right? So I'm just going to show this so you can mess with all your developer friends. So within the sources tab right here, you have overrides, and you can check enable local overrides. And you can see like right here, I have desktop, but you select a folder. You select a folder right here, and all right, so now I have my overrides in there. I can open up a CSS file. Ooh, I didn't type in CSS properly, and I can, I don't know, background, wait, body, important. You can do this, and what's really cool about local overrides is if you refresh the page, that's still there. Well, it should be. I don't know which one I clicked on. So your local overrides will persist, but of course they will only show when your developer tools are open. So that's just something to keep in mind. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in here. And it's all fun to talk about and stuff like that. So that's it for me. Ta-da, thank you.
Hi. So pro.
What's up?
Thank you, Mike. Got some questions for you.
Do you?
Yeah. Why are the Florida Gators so much worse than the Florida Seminoles?
This all comes down to coaching.
All right. So the most popular question was, what's the differences in using Chrome page inspect functions versus the Chrome Canary itself? What extra functionality is there that Chrome itself doesn't have?
Oh, there's a lot of little things that are in there. So if you remember, like Canary is basically like 2 versions ahead of the regular stable Chrome, and so there's new features being added. For example, like the eager evaluation was new. If you go into, let me do one more thing right here. If we go into Chrome Developer Tools and you go into your settings over here, and you can go into experiments down here, you can see a bunch of experiments, and a lot of these things are relatively new. And if you want to get like super, super bleeding edge, there's like a little key combination. You hit the shift key 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and bam, there's like more stuff to look at and like screw around with. So there's all types of stuff like that, which are relatively new. And then another thing, when you're on the airplane, go to Chrome. Oh, is it Chrome? I got to spell Chrome right?
Not that one.
I forget what it is, but like Chrome URLs, is it Whatever. You can get to your Chrome, and it just gives you a whole list of everything that you can get and mess around with, which is pretty neat.
All right. Why can you not pronounce GIF properly? How many people prefer GIF?
Why can't you spell color properly?
Nice. Wrong crowd. Right. So how does this work if you're trying to debug minified files or Webpack setups?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the application that I showed you, the Silly Sounds one with my daughter, that's uglified. And Chrome will handle that as long as there's a proper map file there. I really want to switch to Firefox. Like I did not demo any type of Firefox developer tools right there, but they're making a whole bunch of advancements. But one thing that does not work, at least properly for me, is that feature within Firefox. But that it has been working for me in Chrome. It should work. I'm sure there's situations that will confuse it.
Yeah, and you need to set the source mapping up in Webpack, right? It's a setting.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure,
like
yeah.
You can't just go to someone else's website and like expect it to come out.
I would guess you're correct, yes.
Okay. Cool. So before you go, would you like to help us say hello to all of the people at Front End Reunited?
Yes.
Okay, so we have people in Bangkok, in Thailand.
Bangkok. Hello, Bangkok.
Hello.
Is Lowry here? He can tell me how to say hello?
No, he's actually just flown back to Thailand.
Oh, all right.
So he heard you were speaking there. So
he's trying to catch this.
Yeah, exactly.
Smart man.
We have people in Kigali in Rwanda.
Ooh, that sounds awesome. Hi, Rwanda.
We have Paramaribo. Did I get that right? Yeah.
Is that in Suriname?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes. I have a good friend, Jordana, there, hopefully.
Yes. They're all cheering for her now.
Yes.
Nice. And then we have Pune in India.
India.
Yeah.
India is awesome. Hi.
Cool.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Any message for them?
Rock and roll. I don't know.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Mike Herchel.
Thank you.